Today, we're talking with Irma Olguin, CEO and co-founder at Bitwise Industries. Welcome, Irma.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Melinda.
Yeah.
We both made it. We both made it.
And so how are you? Let's start there. How are you? How are you right now?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So I personally, my person is doing fine. The folks around me are deeply, deeply anxious and, well, so for context, I sit right in the heart of California, right in the Central Valley in Fresno, California. And the Creek Fire, if you're following hashtag Creek Fire on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, wherever else you get your news, it's pretty harrowing, and it's getting very quickly spreading. And I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of, childhood memories and all of these, homes and what have you. So there's a lot of anxiety in the air today. There's a lot of worry. And then, it's not like the world was super easy before these last few days. So doing okay, but it's taking a second to be honest, to unclench and to be present. And I have to work harder at that today than I have, it feels like, in a really long time.
Yeah, I hear you completely on that. It's we can smell it here in San Francisco and see it and breathe it, and it's very sad I'm also having that same struggle with pushing through and still doing the work that is important and meaningful and impactful.
Yeah.
So could you start by telling us a bit about your story, how you got to do what you do today? How did you get to where you are in your career?
Yeah, it's a fun story. It's a little bit tragic, so just a little bit of a heads up, but not uncommon, I think. Well, some of it is a little bit uncommon, but the story of my background is not uncommon. So I just described that I'm right here in the heart of California. And typically, when you think of California, you think palm trees and beaches and movie stars, and you think of the primary markets, right? San Francisco and Los Angeles, and from time to time maybe the state capital, but that's really it when you think about California. And what a lot of people miss, and one of the things that I love to tell people about, is that the center of California, the Central Valley, is responsible for producing between 20 and 30% of the world's food. Right, so agriculture being a really big and driving industry here, it is the industry on which we were built. And on one hand, that's really lovely and awesome. That's good storytelling, And then on the other hand, it's the reality of that. What that has created over time is the system, really antiquated system, where you've got sort of the well-to-do, the folks who own the land, who manage the land, who benefit from the land, and then you've got the folks who work it. Right, the literal labor that works the land. And that's my story. I come from farm labor. I'm the granddaughter actually of immigrants, and got my first job when I was 6 years old, rolling raisins and picking grapes under the sun in Central California. And that's sort of the context, right? The sort of that sets the scene, I hope, for where I come from. But isn't the whole story. So, and that's, I think, the best part is when you grow up that way, or when that is the context from which you come, that's really kind of what you expect from yourself. You're going to do what your parents did. You're going to do what your siblings do, what your aunts and uncles do. But that was not to be how it turned out for me. I was 15. I was in high school. There was an announcement over the loudspeaker that said that the PSAT was being held in the cafeteria. I did not being college bound, I didn't really know what the PSAT was, but I was 15 and I understood that I could get out of class for half a day if I went to the cafeteria. So, so I did. I went to the cafeteria. I sat for the test. I did well on it, had always been a good student, but it would turn out to be the single most important test I'd ever take in my life. Mail started showing up at my house from colleges with mascots on that mail that I recognized from sports teams, and it would say, "Dear Irma, come be a Trojan, come be a whatever." And it was the first time that I thought that maybe college was for people like me, which was a pretty profound moment. Then, of course, if you turn to the pricing page, you realize that it's still not for people like you. So it's still not quite. But in the mail that arrived, eventually there was a scholarship offer. And that scholarship offer was for a school in the Midwest. And I took that letter to my parents and I shared the news that I was going to go to college. You would think that they would be really happy and excited and proud and all of these things. And they were those things, but with like a misery layered on top, because they had to do the job of telling me that even though this was a wonderful thing, the scholarship, you still needed to, how would I get there, right? Not having a working car, not having the means really to get across the country. What was standing between me and this opportunity was transportation, you know? And so they had to deliver this news, but my family's really, really scrappy and ambitious. And like, you know, we're just like, you know, hard scrabble people. And I recruited all of my family to collect cans and bottles with me all summer long, and we recycled them. And so we had a pile of money large enough to buy a Greyhound bus ticket. And I rode from Fresno, California, 2,500 miles to Toledo, Ohio, about a 4-day bus ride to arrive at orientation for college. And then arriving there, still really not knowing what I was doing, 17 years old. Went to the registrar who was going to send me to the correct orientation. And she asked me what my major was. And I said, I have no idea what a major is. And so she explained to me sort of the system of how college works. And I chose one. I flipped through that same catalog that arrived at my house and saw a glass building, shiny, beautiful, new glass building. And being 17, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful to take classes in a glass building? And that turned out to be the College of Engineering, which is the story of how I accidentally became a computer scientist. That's kind of the background. That's the backstory to how I ended up here, which there's fits and starts in between that moment and today. But what it came down to was the technology industry would profoundly and forever change my existence, right? To the point where I had money in my pocket and I was paying all of my bills in the same month, and I was able to leave a generous tip, right? And I was able to do these things that before were not possible things. And I knew that I needed to come home. I needed to come home back to California and bring what Ohio had taught me to the place that I loved and came from, and see if I could give more people that same feeling, which is what I do today. I get to build a whole business around giving more people that sense of agency.
Awesome. So talk a little bit about what Bitwise does.
Bitwise is, like I said, it really is. There was this moment, and it was in my first job as a computer scientist, actually a computer engineer. I was in my first job and I was already out earning everybody in my family. And it was just like this huge, we could talk about that. That's a whole different podcast, but what do you do when you realize that your circumstances are just going to be wildly different than you thought they were going to be? And like, who do you become in those moments? Like, that's a whole, Melinda, we should get together on that.
Yes.
Yes. And anyway, so we really did. We ordered a pizza one night, myself and my colleagues, and I was the only woman. I was the only brown woman. I was the only LGBTQ brown woman. And so, you know, and it's me and these really wonderful white guys, you know, we're ordering a pizza and they come to collect my 20 to hand to the guy who's delivering it. And he shouts back to me. He says, you know, my colleague says, how much do you want to leave for the tip? And in my first job in the technology industry, I had the opportunity to yell back to him, keep the change, tell him to keep the change, which was just like, you know, the feeling washes over your body and you realize that time is standing still and you're not in this world anymore because life is just about to really, really radically change. And it was that feeling that I wanted to bring back, that ability to choose that for yourself in that moment and not calculate whether or not you had enough for gas the next day or another pack of hot dogs or, you know, I wanted to do that. And that became Bitwise Industries. And so in order to do that, it's really the deconstruction of the story you just heard. It is getting folks who are coming from a story of poverty or from a marginalized people group and giving them a way into a technology industry that didn't previously invite them, right? Where they did not receive an invitation before. So doing that, which is really just technology education, if you think about it, and going very far and wide and deep in technology education. And then the second piece, again, reflecting on my life story, was that sense of place, that glass building. It's building those interesting places that actualize the experience of being a technologist, but where you feel welcome, right? So a place where you don't self-select out and tell yourself, I don't belong here. So building those places. And then the third piece is proof. It's actually industry. It's getting that person that living wage, that the extra couple of bucks in the pocket so they can leave a tip. Those three things really are what Bitwise do. We call them different names now. It's now workforce, infrastructure, and industry. But when you take them together, it really is just peeling apart my life story and saying, what made that happen? Because, you know, I think you and I can agree that if we want the world to change, if we want it to be different, you can't wait for that serendipitous story to happen. You've got to be more deliberate. And so we built a business around being more deliberate.
Awesome. So getting into your role as a leader, and we've talked about this, how do you work to build empathy across your team? How do you work to build ally across your team? What are some practical things that you're doing to build your team culture?
We have a saying, and it's actually on a bunch of t-shirts, and we have flags that hang outside of our buildings, and it's everywhere. And it's this fundamental belief that no one belongs here more than you. And the way that we live that out in our company. So I think that it's not just a matter of like the people you employ, but the community you build also is really important to this. But like what we have had to do, and it's our pleasure to do since the beginning, is yes, we want folks to meet personal success, whatever that means to them, right? And it's going to be different for every person. They have their own flavor, but you have to meaningfully and deliberately contribute to somebody else's success. And so that allyship, the idea that I'm essentially standing up for your right to be here as much as my right to be here, that is how we build allyship into our community and culture. And it outside of just keeping the lights on is the most important thing we do.
And if you could kind of maybe talk about a few specific things that you do to really do that effectively. How can, I mean, I think a lot of leaders right now are really struggling with how do you build that in your culture? It's the values, but how do you kind of continue that? What are some of the daily actions that really make that happen?
Yeah, let's move from the abstract, right? Because once upon a time, I would have told you stories about how when you walk into our buildings, you feel welcome, from the music you hear to the way that you're greeted to the bustle around you and the way people are interacting. That is a world that we don't live in today. So we have to live it out differently. But one of the most powerful and actionable things I think that we ever did for our company, and this was several years ago, is that we deployed a policy that everybody in the company, no matter what their job, and we employ janitors and security guards and other folks who help us with our buildings and maintain our environment. Everybody at every level gets a one-on-one with the person that they report to with no agenda. There's no agenda to that meeting. It belongs to the person, which means that if you, let's say Melinda, were my manager, then that time is mine to do with what I wish. And we can tell jokes, we can play Uno, we can talk about work, we can talk about relationship, we can talk about politics. It's mine to control. And your sort of contract with me is that that's uninterrupted time. And it sounds really, really simple, but the number of insights that we've picked up about our people and the way that they feel and whether or not they are supported and do they feel as though they're doing their highest and best, all of that information comes from those one-on-ones. I would say almost exclusively our ability to run a company. We're 200 large now, 200 people. Our ability to run a company that feels more like a wolf pack than a company is those one-on-ones. And we are unfailing in our rigidity there, meaning everyone gets one and everyone gets one every week. And that time that you spend is, again, no agenda. That's not a time to report out how you're doing. It is not a time, unless that's how the person wants that time to go. It's not a time to do reviews. It's, it's not working time. It's just your time to be a human being with another human being that you are charged with doing work in. And what happens in that time is, because you do spend the time with the other person, is you automatically win folks to your side, right? Like, you automatically created a covenant essentially that says that you're on my side and I'm on your side. And if you can do that with every person, I honestly believe that we can maintain the culture that we have, which I do believe is the magic of Bitwise, that we can maintain the culture we have. So long as we do these one-on-ones faithfully in the way that I just described, we can 10x the size of our company and still maintain that wolf pack feeling over the feeling of just a place to, earn a check.
Awesome. So right now we're kind of in a different world. How are you thinking about supporting your team differently during COVID-19, supporting parents? Also, there's a lot of trauma that people are going through, whether it's due to racial injustice and murder that they're seeing daily, or illness and death in their families, or just isolation. How are you approaching that as a leader?
This is a strength, I think, of mine, and is a very hard place to arrive for a lot of people. But once we internalize it, I think this is real. We have to stop thinking that we still live in the world we lived in February. That world does not exist, right? And what that means is that everything that we thought of as foundational, the 40-hour work week, the goals that we set for a specific quarter, the way that we wanted to hold, events or these sort of milestone moments, we have to destroy all of that. We have to obliterate all of that and then literally rebuild an entire company based on what's happening right now. And that is not an easy thing for a lot of people to get to, because I think what folks are doing mostly is they're modifying something that exists. And so making these sort of incremental changes, and that's not going to work. We're going to be in this for too long for that to work, and we're going to wear everyone out, parents especially, and it's going to be really, really hard. And we're going to experience, I think, a level of burnout that we've never seen before, which will result in anxiety and depression and all of these other things. And it'll be really hard to point out why that has happened, because we'll be in it, right? It will be in the weeds of that. And because we think normal, or what we believe to be normal, is what's going to hold our emotions as normal as well. Whereas my belief is, in fact, we're doing the opposite. Holding to that same level of normal is what's destroying us slowly. And so as a business leader, just burn it all down. Like, that's actually, and I say that without pun or humor, knowing that there's a fire literally 20 miles from where I sit. Stop thinking about your business the way that you did 6 months ago, because it doesn't exist anymore. Rebuild all of it. How often, how long people work, what their milestones are, how they report to other people, what you're expecting of them. Oh my gosh, what you're expecting of them. Can we please? And I think that will see us through. We can go back, and I'm using several layers of air quotes. We can go back. Eventually, but now's not the time, and it's not near to our feet. So we're just going to have to do things differently.
And what are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of doing things differently? Yeah,
a few things. So we are reducing. We're about to enact this policy. There are a lot of pieces to think through as a company, because you can't just flip a switch and overnight say, hey, okay, everyone work less, It's just,
and expect less because people are working less.
Right. And it really does come down to that expectation. Because even if you talk to your most dedicated folks, and our folks, thank goodness, are dedicated, they don't want to let you down. They don't want to let you down as a company. And at the same time, they're sort of, to their own detriment, trying to bend over backwards to make that job still work the way that they believe it should work or should have worked 6 months ago. And that can't go on, you guys. As leaders, especially as leaders, we need to set a different expectation, that your job does not look, in fact, the way that it used to. And that as a leader, I need to figure out how to make sure you're working less than you did before. And as a leader, I need to figure out, I need to get involved a little bit in this, the story of school and childcare in a way that I never expected to before. And not necessarily, I'm not going to arrange necessarily your childcare, but I need to know that that is a big part of the whole today, right? I mean, in the same way, I think, before, pre-COVID and pre all of this, in the same way that you would recognize when a specific leader of yours, like a business unit leader or VP or what have you, was maybe going through a personal, say a divorce or something along those lines, a big life change. You do make sort of concessions are the wrong word, but is the wrong word. It's more like you do adjust expectations that this person is going to be performative in a very sort of narrow subset maybe of what they did before. And you might be able to add some things, but it's not going to be the exact same role as before. And for me, where that has played out is folks that used to be really public facing or who are expending a lot of outward energy in entertaining people and, sort of being charming. When they're going through a big life change, they don't have the energy to sustain that. So you modify that, right? You modify that for them. And you might put somebody else in that spot to take over some of the more performative pieces. And you just make do, you sort of make that accommodation. And I think the same is true here. We need to know that folks don't have the energy they had before. They can't sustain as long. Once upon a time, a 16-hour workday, we might have to call in somebody to we got to pull some all-nighters and we're in this together. And, and now a 16-hour day is like one step closer to a meltdown, it's no longer this burst of thing that you get through. It's like, this is actually what might damage your people for the long haul. And we need to figure that out. It's got to come from the top. You have to change the expectations of what you think everyone's jobs look like. And then you've got to convince them that that's okay too.
Yeah, I think that is a big piece. Is we're our own worst critics often, and hold ourselves to high expectations of work, and I think that is a big piece. That's awesome that you're thinking through how to help people get there and understand that they can't do everything that they could before. Yeah. So, can you talk about how have allies helped you in your life? Can you think of an example of an ally that has really made a difference for you in your career?
It's actually, you and I talked about this ahead of this call so that we can kind of get on the same page. And I thought of something because I didn't feel in our conversation that I did a good job sort of explaining what I meant. And rather than professional, I think that there's a more personal example that may be illustrative. And I see this again and again, and I hope it resonates with folks. But allyship to me really is taking a side, right? And where I see that play out, where I think we all feel it so profoundly, is if you, Melinda, were in a relationship and you broke up, and I said, I still want to remain friends with both of you, right? That sort of Pollyanna stance is not helpful to you, right? Because I haven't really taken your side. And where allyship really matters to me is when somebody actually takes my side and says, I'm going to be for this and against the other thing, which is not a middle of the road position to take. And it is alienating. You're making a choice to alienate in some cases. And I think that is what has to happen if you want it to materially affect another person's emotions and their belief in themselves. And so for me, it comes down to choosing a side. And I think you've got to live with the consequences of doing that.
I mean, if you look at our history and you look at the Allied forces, for example, they definitely picked a side and really fought next to each other, fought for each other.
Yeah. And so when I look at it through that lens, or when I describe it from that perspective, there's so many folks who have taken my side. There are so many places where I think to myself, you did not need to do that. You did not need to stick your neck out for me in that specific way. Maybe it's big, maybe it's small, maybe it's public, maybe it's not. but for that person, it's still sticking their neck out, right? And so, and one of the, we talked about this, but one of the places where I remember that, where it had left a deep mark on me, was when we had first formed Bitwise, and my co-founder and I were getting together to sign like the official docs, and it was put the first check in the bank, and all of that. And we had invited some folks who had been along, sort of mentors in the process, especially mentors for my co-founder, who is a 6 foot tall white man, and enjoys the privilege of being that, and knows that, and we talk about that and work through that all the time, but in this specific instance, we had invited some of his mentors who were of a similar ilk, and they were bringing their wives to come and sign these documents, and I was going to bring my partner, a woman. And I remember saying to my co-founder, I said, if these are older gentlemen, and we live in a very conservative place, just for context, and I told my co-founder, I was like, if it's going to be a problem, just tell me, and she'll stay home, and I won't stay long. Like, I'll come sign, and I'll bounce. And he, again, he himself, from just like a very different background than mine, conservative white man from rural California, looks back across at me and says, absolutely not. You show up as you, and I'm going to have your back. And, it's not like he said that to the other folks that were in the room, but he said that to me. And that was, our relationship now is such that either one of us would stand in front of a train for the other, but it's because of moments like those where that level of trust and allyship is built, because you just know that they have your back and they've chosen your side.
Awesome. What does allyship look like for you now? What do you need from allies? What does taking a side for you look like now?
There are a few contexts. I mean, we still building and catalyzing a technology industry in a place like Fresno or in a place like Bakersfield. You get a lot of disbelief. You get a lot of disbelief, and folks sort of patting you on the head and saying, hey, shouldn't you just go to the Bay Area where it'll be easier and you'll make lots of money? So I think that today, allyship looks like folks who believe deeply in the work that we're doing and believe in our ability to get that done. And there are lots of levels that plays out. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it is from a social media or PR perspective. Sometimes it's, it's a number of things, and it shows up all the time. And I think for me, one of the places where it feels really important that I have allies is in my at the board level, right? In the boardroom. We have investors. We're a venture-backed company. We closed a Series A last year. It was a big deal. It was a big deal for us, and to be honest, let me not downplay this. It was a $27 million Series A, and among the largest ever, led by a Latinx female founder. And so it was a big moment for Fresno and the Central Valley. It was a big moment, I hope, for women in technology and for the Latinx community, I hope, as well. And so that all happened last year, which means that we brought into the boardroom for the first time folks who have a bigger say in what you do and what you don't do. And that spot, it's so incredibly important that you've got folks on your side, right? Because you can spend all of your time battling who you are and what you want to do in the world and how you want to exist with the sort of forces of business. You can spend all of your time doing that. And Jake, my co-founder, and I are just saying flatly, no, we're not going to do that. So having that ally in him, having our partners at the board level around the table, gives us the strength and the confidence that we need to go tell this story and to reach more people.
Awesome. And I'm just seeing a question from the audience from Juliet, who has a follow-up question on that. Do you bring on independent board members, and what do you look for in board members? Yeah,
the first things first, like they have to fall in love with us and we have to fall in love with them. There's got to be a bit of a love story there, because the work that we're doing is damn hard. We are up against the odds. Like if market forces tell you anything, it's, you know, the poor stay poor and the rich get richer. Like that is sort of the market system that we've created here in the United States, which means we are fighting the tide of that all the time. So it's hard. And we're doing it in arguably America's most broken places, right? So here in the desert with the fire raging 20 miles from where I sit and rolling blackouts and you know, the heat wave that you were describing, it's a hard place. Yeah, when we are looking for independent board members, it is a love story first, and then it is strategic alignment. Like, where can we connect to the world where we're not connecting currently, and can you help bring that to the table?
Awesome. I am going to jump into questions. So if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm seeing some up here already. I do want to address a question that Toki had answered, I think kind of in jest, but I think it's a real question, which is, how often do you get to have a one-on-one? So how do you take care of yourself? How do you check in? How do you have that time to really decompress and have that kind of dialogue that is outside of work with a colleague?
Yeah, I mean, you've got your normal support systems. I think I would love to say that my mom is that. I love my mom. She has no idea what I do. She's the smartest person I know, but just not interested, you know. I think, you know, I have a dog. You probably can see pictures of him behind me. I think of him more as my son. He's wearing an astronaut uniform. I'm just proud of him, you know, for all he's accomplished. No, but I think I'm really big into like paying attention to self and knowing where like I am from a mental, physical, emotional perspective. And so I meditate. I'm a pretty avid meditator. I actually began meditating, just fun story. I began meditating because I couldn't deal with sitting still on airplanes. And I thought to myself, like, there has to be, and I would like, it was so uncomfortable coming out of my skin that I started to like really dislike myself, you know, because of all the judgment. Like, why can't you do this? It's just there was no fear. I wasn't afraid of flying. I was just uncomfortable all the time. And it became this thing that I dreaded. And I remember telling myself, like, you are pretty smart. You're better than this, you know, like, which is just incredibly judgmental. Right.
Yeah. You know,
but I ended up learning some tools for that, and meditation came to save the day. And it really like helped me be with myself, period. The end. It was just like, can you sit still? And you can, so long as you're not afraid of yourself, you know? And anyway, so that meditation really has helped me a lot, just slow my roll and be present, be with myself, both from a physical perspective, but also mental, emotional as well. I mean, probably mental, emotional overrides almost everything else and becomes physical. So that's where I find, or I get to practice my relief.
Awesome. I meditate daily too. And when I first started, it was 2012, I think, is when I started really meditating regularly. And I was claustrophobic. And so every time I got an airplane, it was really hard to be there. And I realized, wait a minute, I have this tool that I've been using. Let's see if meditation can help me.
Yeah.
And it did. I am okay now on planes. I meditate when it gets bad, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, a big difference. Yeah. Interesting that specific thing resonates with you. Sometimes I describe that to folks, and I always see a little bit of recognition on their face, like, oh yeah, that is uncomfortable, and I don't have to be so uncomfortable.
Yeah. And the first time I did it, I was like, people are going to think I'm so weird because I'm sitting up straight and I'm closing my eyes. But
no, tune all of that out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't matter. All right. So looking at some of the questions, Emily asks, so the weekly one-on-ones as an example of how to make sure that no one belongs more than you, which I love. I love that. are there other examples that you have maybe related to welcoming a new hire? How do you welcome people into the company? How do you address performance concerns?
Yeah, well, I think onboarding is actually a really important piece of not just growing a company, but like keeping what's special about your culture. And we really do force people to spend a lot of time with the folks that they're going to work with in the early days of their employment with us. And so we set up, they're called donuts on Slack. We set up these donut meetings where you get to know one another, and you do that once a week for somebody you don't know in the company. And once upon a time it would be coffee right here in the building, and everybody would spend time. But yeah, having an actual structure to what it looks like for folks to get to know other folks on their team who they won't be working with is actually a really big deal, because they're going to get to know, if you're a programmer, let's say in our company, you're going to get to know the other programmers. It's pretty, over time, organically, that's going to happen. But if you work in, say, security, what are the chances that you are really going to deal with anybody in the finance office? Like you don't. And so we do force that interaction to happen, at least for a short time, so that you get a flavor of the different things that are happening in the company, but more importantly, the different people, different personalities. Salespeople are not the same as accountants. Like they're just cut from a different cloth, everyone. But it's good to sort of have that shared understanding that job is hard, and so is this one, and so we can be empathetic when finance didn't, get the receivable for the contract you just closed, or, whatever the analogy may be in your company. So I think really making the internet and not leaving it to a new person to go and find those connections, but to really build out pathways for them to have those connections and pick them up along the way is really important. Of course, we send swag bombs with shirts that say, no one belongs here more than you, and stickers and those types of things. That's all fun. But really it is like those sort of forced interactions, those pathways, those connections that you make early on are the folks who you're going to stand up for later. And that's it.
Yeah. And when you first get to a company, I think, it's hard to navigate, lots of different things, and having somebody there with you that you can go to and say, hey, how do I do this? How do I go there? Yeah. Makes a big difference too. So Sin asks, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think J is for justice consultant, how would you recommend consultants how would you recommend consultants convince leadership that the world of work needs to be rebuilt, like you said? Any recommendations you have for ways to convince leaders?
Bullying.
Well,
not quite bullying, but we do have to, I do think that we have
bombarding. Yes,
we have to say it out loud. You've got to say, like, this is hard for your people, and the way that you're doing business today is not helping them. So what kind of company what are we setting ourselves up for in terms of recovery if we don't take care of each other right now? Like, honestly, let's just, from whether it's the argument of wearing a mask, or the argument of a impending vaccine, or it doesn't matter, an economic argument. What are we setting ourselves up for if we can't take care of each other in this most difficult of all time, right? And so, like, you're not setting yourself up for recovery if you're not thinking about and worrying about how hard this is for people right now. You're setting yourself up for a company whose employees will leave as soon as they have options. And so I think that maybe it's not quite bullying, but it is a relatively sharp edge, I think, that we need to use. Leader to leader, consultant to leader, or just pal to pal. Like, I know a number of CEOs and who maybe I'm not best friends with, but like, I'm sending messages like, awesome. Y'all are gonna have to slow down. How are we navigating this? So that's I think the answer to that question, as with most things, is it has to be said out loud. That's got to be step one.
Jill is asking, looks like Jill's asking for Shireen. Is there an experience from your own leadership experience that you consider a failure, something that didn't work? And if so, how did it teach you to be a better leader and a better boss?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like failure is actually part of my job. Like part of what a CEO has to do is you are the force that propels something forward, right? You're not the maker anymore. You're no longer the person who's executing on the vision that's already been set. It's like you are the vision mover. And so if there is a speed and a direction anywhere, you're the person who's generating that, which requires a ton of energy. And I think where you let your team down, right? The folks who have trusted you with their time and talent to come and like aid you in your vision is when you don't actually tell them how to be good at it, right? And so that, what I mean by that is like we do a lot of things that don't work. You know, we try programs all the time that, you know, you might go one and done. But the best way for me to set up that situation to actually fail is if I put it around the shoulders of that person to make it work, regardless of whether or not it works, right? And so I think that is a place that I have seen myself sort of fumble because it's so ingrained in me that some things won't work, that when I enter into a situation, I'm not worried about whether or not it does or doesn't, you know, it's like part of me. But somebody you just hired is extremely worried about whether or not they made a thing work. They're extremely worried about that. And so if I don't set them up for a different mindset, I'll ruin them. Honestly, I'll ruin them. I'll make them believe things about themselves that are not true. They will begin to experience whether it's imposter syndrome or just like a self-doubt, or just in general like a timidness about their own ability. Like you can watch those things erode when people do not feel psychologically safe. And the best way to provide a workplace that is not psychologically safe is to not tell people how they're going to win. So that's, I think, you know, where I've learned my biggest lessons is when I have watched my actions ruin other people. And that's really hard. That's really hard to look at as a leader and as a person who doesn't want to do that. It's really hard to know that you did.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne asks, Suzanne works with people with disabilities and is wondering if you think about how you think about people with disabilities and the work that you do, and specifically improving employment outcomes and the technology skills of individuals with disabilities.
Yeah, and I think disability is a blanket term sometimes. And so I want to be really careful about who and what I'm talking about here. But we have worked with folks who don't see as well or don't hear as well, or who sit on the spectrum somewhere. In fact, a lot of the folks we work with are on the spectrum. And so we do things a little bit differently. We have interpreters. We have a different media to deliver our lessons with, and all of the content in the company, which takes a lot of work, to be honest. But it's something that we just need to do because we do want to make sure that, because what it comes down to, our lead investor, from our Series A, the Caper Center, Mitch Kapoor, says a thing that really, really like hit us. And he says, you know, that intelligence is evenly spread, but opportunity is not. And we see that again and again and again. And one of the ways that we prevent folks from really achieving their version of success is by saying, like, you can't participate in this because you need something a little bit different. And so we work really hard not to do that. I'm sure we do it all the time anyway, just, you know, because we're not adept at every modality, but we're working toward that. And so it does create quite a bit of work, but every time is worth it. Every single time is worth it. And so we have really improved outcomes for folks who come to us with different challenges, but we could do more. We could always do more.
Andrew asks, I would imagine that the weekly one-on-ones would build a lot of personal trust and prevent a lot of performance issues, or when they arise, they're more easily resolved. Have you had to deal with any difficult non-technical performance issues, and do you have any lessons learned there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sure, there are going to be, I think at its heart, when we're saying no one belongs more than you, and when we're saying you get a one-on-one, it doesn't matter at what level you say it. When we say those things, what we're saying is like, we believe in our bones that you, employee, fundamentally want to be good at something, and that you are devoting your time and effort to being good at this specifically, right? And I would say that that's true 99.5% of the time, but there's going to be that little bit out there who, like, they're not interested in actually being good at this for you, and they're here for reasons that are motivated differently. And for those people, we really can't help them, right? I can't make you want to be here, and I can't make you want my dream, right? I can't make you want to devote your time to my dream. But what that means is, just because they don't fit with what we have built, it doesn't mean that we have the right to treat them poorly. And so that means two things for us. It means, one, you should always know where you stand. No gotchas. We do not lay traps. We don't wait for you to fail at something. We don't wait for you to mess up so that we can write you up. It's like, if we see you on your way to failure, you're gonna be told, like, hey, that is not how we talk to people, or hey, that deadline is about to get missed if you don't do these 5 things, or whatever. So no gotchas. We do not lay traps. And the second thing is, if or when it doesn't work, that person still gets to leave with dignity. Meaning, we don't need to tell everyone else on the team how they failed. It's like, this person is on their way to something else. We wish them well, and they will continue to be a friend to Bitwise unless they decide to try to burn down a building. Like, those are the two things, like, no gotchas, and you get to leave with dignity. And that, we hope, creates an off ramp for folks who just won't fit with the culture that we've created, which, again, back to the beginning, we want you to find your version of personal success, but then you have to contribute to the success of others. And if those two things you can't live up to, it's okay, but this is not going to be the place for you.
Awesome. Last question here is from Saskia. We just started doing the donut connections. My company is very small, and there's been some turnover, a lot of turnover, and they were feeling really disconnected and more not psychologically fit. How would you advise that Saskia try to keep connecting in small ways? Any thoughts for? I mean, I think that is probably what a lot of people are going through right now. That there is this disconnection that happens, and they're just. We can't be connected in the same way remotely as we are in person. And then on top of that, so much else is happening. And the tech industry, some companies are hiring, a lot of companies are not, and there is turnover.
Yeah. Well, this is going to feel probably counterintuitive, but what I heard in the reading of that question is incredible. What I have to believe is crushing self-doubt. In a scenario where I meet a person who is living underneath that weight at the moment, my advice always is, do absolutely nothing. Make no new decisions. Now is not the moment to decide what your future looks like. Instead, figure out a way to quiet that, right? Remove the need to make a new decision today, and spend time figuring out what it is you actually want and need and are obligated to. Those things, once you know them, will inform what you need to do, whether that is spend more time with your employees, spend less time with your employees, find a replacement, resign, shut down your company, right? Like, it could be any of those things, but let's not make that decision today until we actually know what the heart of it is. And so, first things first, remove the pressure of making a new decision today, and instead get in touch with where you actually sit with it, which is going to require some time and some quiet.
Awesome. One last question from me is, what are a couple of words or thoughts that you have thinking about the future? It's so hard to think, we're so stuck. I often find myself stuck right here, right now. There's so much going on, but as a leader, we also have to be thinking about the future. What are some of the thoughts that you have going into the end of 2020 and 2021? What does that look like?
I think the most relieving thing that we can do, as not just as leaders, but as just human beings, is to stop waiting to start again. I think that we have become trapped in, like, as soon as we all go back to work, or when the economy reopens, or as soon as my kid goes back to school, I'll start to feel better. I'll start to live again. I'll start to understand my own life again. And I think the sooner we can let go of needing the world to change, the faster we can get back to happiness, or at least contentedness. And I think, if I'm being honest, I do think that we're in this for a while. Like, I think that from a pandemic perspective, we're in this for a while. We know from an economic perspective, we're in this for a while. From a political angle, we don't know. I mean, we have 60 some days to know that, right? And but even that is going to be a while. And so I don't look at December 31st, 2020 as a magic bullet, and at midnight, everything resets, and January 1, we're all happy again. I think we really need to look at, like, what do I need today to feel just a little, change one thing. What is the one thing I can change to be a little bit more content with the way things are? Is there a change I can make in me or in my surroundings and my environment to make it that much more bearable? And then let's do that by increments. Let's do that 1% at a time until we're past this point of waiting for the world to restart. Because I think that we are just going to slowly starve that way.
Yeah.
Like, from a soul, heart perspective, I think we'll slowly starve.
Thank you. That was awesome. And I think that and all of what you said, I think, has really resonated. Looking at all the moments in the chat, and appreciate you and appreciate what you bring into the world and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for your work also, and for thinking of me for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And I say this every week, that allyship is a journey. It requires learning. It also requires action. So take this learning and go act on it. Do something different. Reflect on this conversation, tie it back into your life, and pick something new that you will do. And join us each week for Leading with Empathy and Allyship. You can RSVP for future episodes and sign up for our newsletter at changecatalyst.co/allyship series. And please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel, and share this with friends and colleagues. All right. See you next time. Thanks, Irma.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.